going well with you. Good morning, afternoon, good evening, whatever it may be for you. God bless you. Let's get started here and let's talk a little about Nile Valley civilizations. I hope you are doing well. I want to kind of jump into this and I want to kind of talk about the civilizations of the Nile Valley and really kind of ask ourselves, let's ask ourselves, where did they really start? When did the civilizations of the Nile Valley really start? Because I think it's so important for us to be thinking about this and to be asking ourselves questions critically when it comes to history. And so I want to talk about Nile Valley civilizations and use some common sense things as well as some to try to get rid of some of the misnomers and some of the ways we think about history that really kind of cut us off from so much of the contributions, so many contributions from so many other people. So before I do that, I'll ask that you take a look down below in the comments. You take a look at my book, Stories About Black History. That you'll check it out on Amazon. That you'll support me if you can get a chance to check that out. And also share this information. Talk to somebody about this information. Share this with information so it's not just, that doesn't just stay with us. It's not just with us. It goes out to people. So let's talk about that. I want to talk about Nile Valley civilizations here. And you see this woman here, she is from the New Kingdom, and she is the mother, the woman of the house, if you will, of a family that lived during the New Kingdom that were very skilled and artisans at that time. They were a very skilled family that had a burial chamber that was found with them. But I chose her because she represents a long line of people, and you see all of the decorations, and you see all of the information, if you will, that's included on her coffin. You understand that all that went into making that, everything that went into, the hair the hairstyle, the hair dress, the coloring and the paint on her, and the artifacts that are included in her tomb, as well as a part of her coffin, as well as all the intricate artwork and writings and messages that are being said. This artifact here, this coffin of this woman who lived, thousands of years ago, is saying so much, and it took many years, thousands of years to go into making that coffin. It wasn't just the skill of making the coffin. It was the information that's included in the coffin. Think about that. All of the beliefs that are there, all of the some of the things might have been misnomers that they had. Some of the things might have been beliefs that were maybe gone awry, or beliefs that were different than other people. They may have been all kinds of things, but it took a long time to develop the writing system, the beliefs, the ideas, the coordination. All of that took many thousands of years, and it wasn't just a few thousand years ago. So I like to think about that and look at it, and I'll note that you'll see the couple of resources that we'll be talking about here will be coming from, you'll find them at the Metropolitan Museum. I had that reference right on there. They're open access, public domain. I wanted to kind of use this to talk about the idea of civilizations and history happening long before we give it credit, right? Long before we like to look at and think about when things started. Things were already happening a long time ago. So when we think about this, and I think about just the Kemetic timeline, I'll just kind of put this up. If you just are looking at the timeline of Kemet's history, you may start with 3100 BC, and you say, well, that's when the first dynasties, that's when, dynasties 1 and 2 were around 3100 BC or thereabouts, right? And then you start going into the Old Kingdom around 2649 BC. Then you have intermediate period, and you go into the Middle Kingdom around 2030 BC or thereabouts, and you start to go into the New Kingdom, and then the late period when the Kushite folks took over, and things after that, the Ptolemies and Romans after that. You start having this long period, even from 3100 to 332 BC, from the first dynasties all the way through the late period. You find a connected culture in ancient Kemet. And we like to kind of draw that line, if you almost kind of draw a line in the sand. It's like, this is when the civilization of Kemet started. This is when but when you look at just this woman's coffin, when you look at all that went into the development of this was a long time in the making. It wasn't just that you had people that popped up suddenly 3100 BC, and that's when history began. That's when we can begin to talk about it. And a lot of times, even in our schools, we don't even talk about this. I mean, there are people in Sumer, there are people in the Indus Valley. There are people all over the world at 3100 BC doing amazing things, but we just don't talk about them. We have so many artifacts from ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, that it's hard not to talk about. Such an incredible civilization that left so many things to humankind. But a lot of times when we talk about history, even though we have this overwhelming amount of evidence, overwhelming amount of literature, overwhelming amount of religious thoughts, overwhelming amount of scientific things that they contributed to and that they did before a lot of other people, when we start to talk about history, we just don't talk about them. We just skip over like 3,000 years of history, and we don't begin it until the Greeks and the Romans. Like that's ridiculous. We know that writing comes from a different part of the world than where Greece and Rome were. We know that mathematics and the algebra that we practice come from a different part of the world, and we just don't talk about those areas of the world. And we like to draw a line in the sand. And I think this is just kind of ridiculous to think about. So that's why I want to kind of challenge our mind today and think about this question. How long ago was it then when the Nile Valley civilizations developed? How long did it take? Like, really, where was this taking place? How long was this? So as I look at that, things go way, way back before 3100 BC. If you take a look at that map right there, kind of the map of the Nile, if you will, looking at the Nile Valley, you see, this river that starts at one point, one of the branches of the Nile that feed into the area, the meeting point in Khartoum. They come from down there, where in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. That whole area there is one of the sources of the Nile, and then you have another major source in the highlands of Ethiopia, meeting in Khartoum. And you also have a third major source of the Nile, all meeting there in the Sudan and flowing out down toward the Mediterranean Sea. Now, this has obviously been going on for a long period of time, but human beings come from Africa. People, Homo sapiens, people just like you and me, were in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. The fossil record is millions of years old. So for us to think that there's this line in the sand that somehow civilization began at a certain point in time and at a certain point in the Nile Valley, we like to pick, we pick sometimes. We like to pick something. I mean, it's okay if you're having a conversation and you're just, trying to have a starting point within which to give you some context. I get that. But overall, we just generally talk about the world as if the people who were here and who were there a long time ago just like didn't exist. There were people in Australia 60,000 years ago. 60,000 years ago, there were people in Australia, and they got there by boat. Now, then the first thing will come up, we'll say, well, it wasn't a real boat. We will immediately downplay the accomplishments of our ancestors. I mean, all of us, we have the same ancestors. I mean, we are all of one human family. We all have the same ancestors, and they come from Africa. Our ancestors come from Africa. And as ancestors went out from Africa and they went all over the world, they did many amazing things. They did some things that maybe we won't even hear about, things we won't even know about because it's been that long. So as I mentioned to you, 60,000 years ago, people in Australia, they got there by developing vessels that would take them across that water to get there. And so, we're talking accomplishments that when we see things like that, when we hear things like that, we just poo-poo it. The modern way of talking about it, the way it happens in our schools, frankly, some of the ways it's just racist, the wrong way of talking about it. We just ignore everybody's contributions. People have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. Civilizations have been around for that long. In my opinion, they have been around for that long, and tens of thousands of years they've been around. When you start to think about the Nile Valley, just don't think of it in terms of 3,000 years ago. Think about this as a highway. People are going up and down here for hundreds of thousands of years. So put your mind back 50,000 years ago. Just what's happening 50,000 years ago? And if you think about it, even if you're sitting where you are right now, if you sit where you are right now and you imagine 200,000 years in the future, 200,000 years in the future, people might not even know you, right? Obviously, right? They may not, nothing you see around you may even exist. You may have accomplished amazing things and it may not even exist anymore. It's quite possible that tens of thousands of years ago, long before the civilization in Kemet started, long before even Kush and Yemen, places like that started, people were doing things that we just don't know about. We were doing things that we just don't give credit for, or either we ignore, or it could be long gone because it's been that long, right? So we just tend to ignore things, and I think that's a challenge with us. Why do we do that? And why do we let people do it to us? Why do we let people teach us that way? That's a ridiculous way of thinking. Everybody had a contribution. This whole valley that's open up and down the Nile Valley has been open for business, so to speak. You're going up and down there. You've had for a long period, for much of its history, an open access, open waterways. If people have been going up and down there on vessels, long before Kemet was a country, long before the two lands united, there were people doing up and down river traffic. And as I mentioned, people were all over the world by this time. They're all over the world. 3000 BC, 3,000 years before Christ, 5,000 years ago, people are all over the world. And they're doing all kinds of things. They're in North America, they're in South America, and they got there by boat. It wasn't all just walking but what people, there were boats were also used to get to North America and South America. People who inhabited eventually the Hawaiian Islands got there by boat. They got there, and they got there through navigation techniques. They got there many type of ways. So, what I'm challenging and what I'm saying is we have to challenge the way history is taught to us. We have to challenge the way people try to draw lines and to put us in boxes and to put distinctions between us that just negate tens of thousands of years of people's accomplishments, right? I was reading about the whole Napa Playa. You might be familiar with it. It's an astronomical observatory that's in the Nile Valley. It's right there where you see the word Lower Nubia. It's right there to the west of the Nile in what would be Lower Nubia at the time. And it took place. It was something that was maybe 7,000 years old, maybe 4,500 years before Christ or older or somewhere around. It's an astronomical observatory. You could look up. They found it, and it's something that was there and that was placed there deliberately, and it helped them to observe certain astronomical events, being able to observe certain times of the day, certain days of the year. And this was something that was built at least 4,500 years ago, and maybe 4,500 years before Christ, BC. Something that was built many, many years ago, thousands of years ago. And I was reading one of the people who help credit with discovering it, right? It's really funny. We talk more sometimes about the people who discover things than we do about the things themselves and the people who made them. But it's okay. But it's not okay. But I was reading about the people who discovered them, and one of this conversation, they wrote a paper on. They wrote several papers on it, and one of the things they mentioned is that they were looking in this area of the world. They were in the Lower Nubia. They had been in the Nile Valley. They'd been many places around Lower Nubia. And it was one site that they saw, and they literally just passed over. They just assumed that it was nothing, that they just kind of went by and like, this is nothing. And somebody noticed, like, wait a minute, that's kind of odd. That looks like that is like that's a range. That looks like that might be a pattern that we see. And they looked into it and investigated. And sure enough, after much investigation, they found there was a whole bunch of things there that they just hadn't known. There were things that maybe they had skipped over. There was this incredible astronomical observatory, apparently one of the oldest ones, if not the oldest one in the world, one of the oldest ones in the world. And at some point in time, we just walked by it. At some point in time, we just ignored it. We just didn't know what it was. We just kind of moved by. How many things like that exist around the world? We know for sure people all over the world. We know that. Like that's not a question. We know people all over the world. We know people inhabited the world from Africa all over the world, right? So some of the first people anywhere were Black people. They were coming from Africa. And so we know that people inhabit the world all over the world. And we just like dismiss their accomplishments. We don't even begin to think, how did they start to begin to understand, the days of the week or the day or the fact that the moon went in cycles. I've heard people talk about these types of things a lot, and you get very specific. If you were going around in family groups and you are, let's say, a woman like this woman right here, and you have a cycle, right? You have natural things that happen to you on a regular basis. You may very easily, very quickly begin to understand those cycles, begin to understand different things that things are repeating, begin to be able to count, right? If you have a certain amount of food, or if you have a certain amount of things you have to share, and you have so many people share it, you got to divvy it up. There's so many different things that happen that we don't even give ourselves credit for thinking through, right? Just like walking past things there in Napa Playa, just like ignoring some of the things that we just don't think that the people were actually doing common sense things, right? If a woman's having her cycle every month, she knows about the month. She's going to be observant about things because she's going to know it. She's going to be aware of certain things because her body is sharing with certain things. That's natural. And that's been going on for many, many years, a long time. That's been going on. The whole idea of people doing rock paintings and you've probably seen rock paintings in Australia. Like I said, people have been in Australia for 60,000 years. People doing rock paintings in Australia that are similar to rock paintings in France, right? That might be 30,000 years old, and people being in Australia for 60,000 years or whatever it may be, and tens of thousands of years. Rock paintings very, very old in South Africa and various places like that. Places where they're mining for iron ore, and places we just don't give them credit. You know what I mean? Some of the places you see in ancient Kemet, you see them making copper, you see them doing things with metal, and we don't even think about their metalworks, And so when I think about this, I asked myself and I ask ourselves, why do we let people tell us that history started at a certain point? Why do we let people just ignore tens, thousands and thousands of years of human history and human ingenuity all over the world just so that we can start at 2,000 years ago. Like that's something that we have to reject. And I think we have to start using like our common sense and not to, if somebody was living, thousands, 10,000 years ago, thousands of years ago, and they made their way up the Nile and they made their way to what is today China, or 60,000 years ago, they made their way to Australia. That's an accomplishment. That's amazing. That's amazing to do that at that time, tens of thousands of years ago, and to make your way to Australia, or to make your way to the British Isles, or to make your way to the northern part of mountains, Caucasus Mountains, wherever you might be. That's amazing. To be in North America tens of thousands of years ago, that's amazing. And they didn't all get there through the Bering Strait. They got there some by boat as well. That's amazing. To have gone to North America, some by boat, to make it all the way down through South America, and to have people there 10,000 years ago. That's all accomplishments. That's all ingenuity. That's smart. That's working together. That's cooperation. That's intelligence. That's a remarkable accomplishment I think we need to talk about. And we need to get away from this whole idea that life just started somehow 2,000 years ago. Life just started a short period of time ago. It's been going on for a long time, for as long as people have been here. And I want to celebrate that. So I just wanted to share that with you. I hope you have a good day. God bless you. And I hope you share this with somebody.